Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining and happy holidays wherever you are viewing this from. So you're about to watch one of our guest interviews that we have here on the program with Being Tea every month. Throughout the year, I invite different folks who have some sort of connection to tea in my life. So that might be people who work in the industry. We've had growers on the show, for example. We've had tea sellers, we've had blenders. We've had folks talk about different aspects of tea production or tea cultivation. It can also be people for whom tea is very much part of their own personal practice and what they believe in, what they share. And we do these programs as a way of just introducing more people to the connection of the world of tea, so we can all start to get to know good tea people more regularly and facilitate some of these conversations around the very wide, very large culture of tea. The guest interviews that we have each month are supported by the members of my online tea program, which you can find information about here at patreon.com/beingtea. Every month we do live classes for members ranging from $5 a month to $15 a month for people to become members on all sorts of different topics: tea skills, tea meditation, things like that. So thanks to members, we're able to do programs like this and be able to invite wonderful guests on our show. So this month's guest is a special friend of mine who I met at a time in my life, actually, where I was doing a lot of commuting. I was working both here at home in Chicago as well as working in Europe. I was with a company, Paper and Tea, in Berlin. And so our guest today is here to talk about a form of art that he practices with his tea. Let me just invite Michael up on screen. So Michael Pieracci is, you could say, a photographer. He is a traveler. He is also, I would say, a tea artist. Good morning, Michael. Thanks for joining.
Hello. Good evening from Berlin. Thank you for having me. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, you are just fine.
Great. Thank you.
So thanks for sharing. I thought this would be such a really timely discussion because one, you presented your project last month at the Berlin Tea Festival, which I thought was so exciting, really awesome. But finishing out the year that we have, I think December is a great time for kind of the more introspective work where we go in and most of us, like yourself and here, of course, in Chicago, are in really snowy environments. And, it's lots of time for thinking about the year and looking back. And so I thought the idea of talking about some of these deeper connections that we have with tea, and particularly with art, as a medium for that would be a wonderful discussion. So thank you so much for coming on.
For sure. It's nice to be here.
Yeah. So I have some questions and we'll just kind of chat as we go, but just get started to kind of introduce you to folks. So share a little bit about like your connection with tea, like when you started drinking tea and kind of when it started to feel like it was more than just a nice beverage for you.
Yeah, good question. I have a few memories from childhood as a young person and then becoming an adult where tea was something in my life. I remember being quite young and being sick with a cold at home, and my mom made like a spiced tea for me with milk and honey, and it was very nice. It was a nice warm thing to have while being sick and uncomfortable. Many years later, I sort of started following my own interest in scented black teas and more sort of an English tea tradition with black teas, milk and sugar, scones, and little foods and things like that. That was an interest of mine. And it was nice to dip into the world of loose tea because of a tea shop in San Jose called Lisa's Tea Treasures. It was a restaurant, actually. Much later on, more in my adult life, living in this was before I lived in San Francisco, I had a lover at the time, someone I was seeing, and we would have tea together frequently. And that was the first time I was exposed to sort of a higher tier of tea, nicer quality loose leaf blends, some that were blends, scents and blends, and some that were orthodox as well. And that was really quite nice to see, to develop that own experience on a very personal level, but then begin to have tea that was much nicer in flavor and experience. From then on, it became part of my interest in traveling. I would travel, and I discovered it was enjoyable to find tea shops and buy tea, and begin to learn about what was out there in the world, stuff that was beyond more everyday teas, I would say, stuff that was maybe a little more expensive or a little more nuanced or very seasonal, and buy small amounts and then bring it home, and then I would prepare the tea and remember the travel experience that I had. Yeah. So those were all of the beginnings, I would say.
And so do you think like pretty early on for you, it was something where you realized that there was more to the narrative, since you were connecting with it through kind of like personal times in your life and through travel and experiences that are kind of inherently inward? Like was it ever just a beverage to you?
Maybe towards my younger years, but I think as I started to own a little more and take more personal time to discover what was out there, what I liked, what I didn't like, and the process to buy, and then I began my own interest and started reading about tea types, tea origins, and stuff. I think, and it really took off is when in 2013 I decided to have some life change. I took a long pause from work, and I traveled to India to visit the Makaibari estate in Darjeeling. And that was really special because at the time I had a specific interest in Darjeeling teas. I was interested in just the complicated and history of the region. And I loved the teas themselves. I thought they were so different from other teas that I had experienced in my life. And I made arrangements to visit there and spend time at this estate and see tea firsthand for the very first time, seeing tea plants, seeing this style of production, and also understanding that tea in this region has general trends of how it's grown and produced. But then I was realizing to visit just one estate means that I would get to see just one way of doing it. And I realized that it was how interesting it would be then to continue the idea and get to know or get to realize that different estates within regions, different farms are producing different teas differently compared to their neighbors, and of course within different regions. After Darjeeling, the people there at the estate helped me to plan a trip to southern India to Coonoor, to the Nilgiri Mountains. I'm getting the right words. I hope I'm getting the right names correct. But the tea production, for example, tea production in this region of India is very, very different. And it was nice to learn. So coming from Darjeeling, I had seen sort of very top quality teas, loose teas that were mostly exported, sort of in a luxury sense, so to speak. But then to travel to Nilgiri, I was seeing that all the teas there were the CTC for tea bags for domestic consumption. So it was going from really fluffy white, greenish looking Darjeelings to very, very dark, very ground up CTC black teas and all the grades that are part of that. And I really realized that all of this tea is important in the tea world, but indeed these are interesting examples where the markets for buyers are very different. And so these regions are producing teas to fulfill different markets. And that was exciting to see.
How did that feel for you personally when you were able to see that in, like it's this thing where I think for a lot of tea people, you have this the idea in your head of what you think you might feel in the experience, and then what you actually feel. And then for you, particularly seeing like two very different styles in different areas. Or do you remember what some of your first like thoughts were, or your first feelings?
I remember being very excited to see that there was such a difference, and that even at the time I remember, and as a younger person, I remember thinking like, well, there's different qualities of teas, high quality and low quality. But I think that there are different ways to look at this. So even though the CTC teas, for example, it would not be fair to call them low quality per se. Rather, it was just the region producing tea for a different marketplace that happened to be a different grade. So there are grades within this world of tea. Like there was not just one CTC, there was 6 different grades of the CTCs, and one of the grades was called dust. And I had thought that dust was just sort of a funny comical term to say like tea dust in a bag, but actually that's a marketable product that was important for different categories, different categories of customers, and for different uses within tea drinking, and actually even beyond. I think they commented that a lot of these more ground up dusty grades of tea were used as a flavoring agent. Is that the right way to say it? Flavoring agent,
like in supplements and cosmetics and things like that. Yeah, flavorings. Yeah, they have a lot of uses.
Yeah, so I was so surprised to see that there was even a very broad use for so many of this grade of tea within this area that I was seeing. And actually, at the time, the estate that I visited was trying to broaden the tea products that they produced. They were trying to produce a green tea, and they had taken some expertise from Makai. Some people were there, and they were there to spend time to see what would work with the tea plants, the equipment, the setup they had for production and manufacture, to see if they could make a green tea that was tasty and something that they could sell to their markets. So I never knew what happened to that project, but it was nice to hear that investment was taking place to sort of diversify the products that they were making.
Well, and to see that in progress for yourself too, like, to be able to see it at a stage where it's still just an idea, it's still something that people are just working on. And I think the idea of being able to see tea from different vantage points, whether that's like, it's a marketing sense, it's business too, but it can also, I think, dovetails really nicely into being able to see tea in different personal ways too, versus like this kind of very black and white, like, there's very high quality and then there's everything else that's crap, and you go and you see it in person and you're like, well, it's all the same plant and the same human effort that it takes to do that and to create it. And it gives you so much more appreciation for like just the scope of what it takes to put tea in this world.
Definitely. And there's to understand, then to see a bit more about volumes of tea that were being created. And it was like giant in both cases, both farms that I was in, Darjeeling and Nilgiri, there were giant bags of tea that was being produced. And to see these enormous bags that probably weighed as much as an adult human, or it's something exciting.
Like you want to. This is a huge volume. It's like hugging a person.
Exactly.
So big.
So I was very happy that things worked out in my life at the time to be able to go and visit first Makai and then the second experience in Nilgiri. It's 2 very contrasting worlds of tea that really gave me great exposure to the endless possibilities of tea production.
Yeah. When do you think you started kind of exploring like this side of tea that remains, like after you've sat and you've had some tea, or even just like during the entirety of the process, like you started seeing this opportunity to consider tea in a different light, in something that's more artful? When did that start?
Yeah.
When I met you, were already collecting and you were already doing some of that.
Exactly. I believe we met in about 2015. And that's when I had an exhibition to showcase these items. And to step back, I moved to Berlin from San Francisco in 2013. And around in 2014, as I was still figuring out what to do here and developing my own personal life and professional life, I was also sort of around a lot of people who have points of view, very natural points of view at anything that can be considered artistic. And I think people, it's a very Berlin thing, so to speak, that this sort of mindset is very present in almost everywhere that we go, I would say. And I think I just recall there was something I was like, I was brewing tea and seeing that I've always had an appreciation to look at leaves afterwards because they're quite wet and beautiful, and you see qualities of the leaf that maybe you don't see when they're dry. Also, the leaf is opened and relaxed. And I just very casually thought, oh, what if I just saved these and dried them and saw what it might look like after a period of time. So I started to put leaves aside in a bowl, and I had to fluff them a few times a day to make sure that they would be air would circulate and they wouldn't get moldy or anything. But from then on, I decided to continue doing this, and I started to see a volume of leaf matter, so to speak, that was simply nice to look at and nice to touch. It had a satisfaction in it being present and then handling it, because as I would fluff the leaves, now the leaves were becoming drier and drier and lighter, and a certain aroma remained. It was just a very general plant aroma, I would say, and it was quite nice. And I realized that this was a record of what I had consumed. And I also was very satisfied to know that I was consuming something that was a natural product and I could just throw back into the planet somehow, somewhere, someday, and it would be able to be digested into the planet again. That was very satisfying to me somehow.
Did you see, like, at the time, maybe some connections? Because it seems like now, looking back on it, it's pretty, like, there's some real obvious kind of sensory connection between some of the things that you witnessed at a tea farm and seeing how tea is produced and how it's handled and what the leaves are like, and this process of being able to understand them through touch, you know, from like the raw tea material to like the finished, and then it's like you're going in reverse of that. And did you find some sensory similarity to that as you were getting into this, or was it something you maybe perhaps weren't really thinking about at the time? It was like new, it was totally different, new thing.
I think it produced this sort of result that I was surprised to see, but it was hard to describe. Did your video go away?
Nope.
Hello. Okay.
Yeah, still good.
Okay. It simply, I think that it allowed me to reconnect with something that I had experienced before. For example, one would not let's imagine you have 50 grams of a tea that you love. No one would really just take it and dump it into a bowl and then leave it there. We want to drink it, of course. And then, but I still wanted to do something with the leaves because I still wanted to interact with them, I think. And so I think with the process of saving all of the leaves, I was very pleased to be able to continually interact with the tea that I had consumed previously and begin to see a mix of all the different teas that I had. This visual record was somehow very pleasing.
I like the idea too of, like, especially something that you only have 50 grams of, it's kind of precious. It almost it almost seems like just drinking it alone isn't enough in a way, you know, that it wants something more of you in order to really feel like you're fully participating with it, you know, if that makes sense.
I think so. In some ways, I didn't like throwing away the tea leaves. I wasn't ready to discard this. So much of there's plenty in our life where we consume something and then that something is discarded. Well, I didn't want to part with the tea yet. I also had this curious point of view, like, well, now all of my tea can go spend time together in a bowl. Or in a plate or in a bag. I thought, well, they can all be friends in the bag. That was kind of nice.
Oh, yeah. I find actually people bring that up a lot in classes where we, if we have the opportunity at the end, we mix our leaves together and kind of like sort of like an offering bowl. And that's like one of the first comments that people observe is like everything all together, and like the relationship between not only just the leaves themselves, but our choices as people, when we choose to drink any one of those teas, and we see them as they're all mixed together, and see that connectivity that happens there too.
Yeah. I liked holding on to it somehow. And in the process, not only was I drying the leaves just out in the air, but I was beginning to press them onto paper because I realized that there was still a lot of color that was still coming from the leaves. So I experimented over time with placing leaves on paper, and then placing them on paper with another surface and weight to add pressure to the leaves so that they would leak the colors on the inside. So this is how I began creating a second element of this overall tea art, let's say, was by placing leaves onto paper and seeing just what would happen.
Let's see. Your camera went away for a second, but do you want to try maybe try the screen share, and that way we can see the photos, because we were just about to get into that anyway.
Yes, one moment.
So the exhibit that you initially started with is called This is Tea, and had different segments to it. And then part of that, or the entirety of that, is what you were showing at the tea festival last month.
Yeah, the This is Tea thing, the exhibition I did in 2015, it was the collection of dried tea leaves. It was the collection of leaf prints on paper, and it was a series of photographs of cups of tea. And on the last Berlin Tea Festival just a few weeks ago, it worked out. They offered me one of the interactive sessions, a 30-minute slot to do something, and it worked out nicely that I thought, I think it would be nice to show the collection of tea leaves that I have and let people interact with them. So it was just at the tea festival, it was just that one item. 1 second.
Sure.
Okay. So I have is that working?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. I could touch on a few topics here. So just as a bit of an introduction, the process of saving the leaves, every day, every time I had tea, or I would eventually add the leaves to just a pile, and I would mix them and allow them to begin drying. So in this particular example, this is actually on fabric. At the time, I wasn't pressing into paper, but rather experimenting with pressing into fabric. So every time I would add new wet tea leaves to the collection, I had a different look and a different feel. And I knew that now I was able to contrast what I had just consumed from what I had consumed maybe a few days before. So this, looking at this was very visually pleasing. It was simply nice to look at. And to go a little step further, so this is an example where the leaves, in this case, the leaves have been quite flattened because there was weight applied to them previously. And you can begin to see in the paper the brown that was coming from the leaves. And I was curious to see what types of colors would come. What I noticed is that there's sort of different shades of brown, lighter or darker brown, and they could be more of a yellow brown or a red brown or a brown, for example. So there was even greater ranges of colors. There were greater ranges of brown. I even had no idea that it would even be possible to kind of see this kind of result from within the leaves. And I was very just pleased to see that. And I mentioned that fluffing the leaves was very, very important because otherwise mold would develop. So here was an example where I had too much tea over time. There was not enough ventilation, and I had probably not opened the window, and I hadn't fluffed them enough. And so in a section, mold was beginning to develop. And when this happens, I carefully try to scoop out all the sections that have become moldy, and I just discard them completely. But different concentrations of tea behaved a little bit differently. So large leaf teas were much easier to fluff and ensure that we were ventilating properly. But if I had a tea that was much more broken, much more ground up, it was a little more difficult to make sure that it was going to dry completely and correctly. But even then, as with the variety of teas that I drink, I was so pleased to see this variety again in the size of the leaf, and a very separated leaf, or ones that are more sort of come together as like a collection.
It really is a lot like, I mean, the steps of tea production, like that same sort of care, the fluffing, the ventilation, like noticing color differences between batches as they're developing different stages. It's like its own kind of production.
Yeah. This is just another example of I do drink a lot of Chinese black teas, Yunnan teas. That's why you see a lot of sort of pale gold in the collection of leaves. And I do also drink green teas. And so here I think was some Anji Baicha that I had had just that day. And so to add it provides, I would say, a very different look. A lot of the Yunnan leaves and buds were much more twisted and golden and very hairy. And what I found in an example like this is that the leaves were much more sort of flat rolled and not twisted rolled, I think. And so that provided even a different leaf shape, which was quite nice to see. And someone just asked me recently, they said something like, oh, it looks like you don't drink any green tea. And I was like, oh, no, I do, but just not so much. But as I begin to look within all the leaves, different teas really, something like the Yunnan really stands out because that pale gold is really distinct. But a lot of other teas I found dry very dark. Sometimes it's a dark brown, sometimes it's sort of a gray black color. And so it was becoming more and more difficult to spot the green teas, I would say. But I do have I took some macro shots recently. I'll bring this up now. Is that coming through? Yeah. So in this example, I was nice to see a certain texture that is maintained for all of the leaves. Some of them have a bit of a softer texture, like all the Yunnan pieces. And there are examples here that have really dark, almost charcoal brown, black, a look to them. And even sort of in the center, if you look at the center of the photo and you go up just a little bit to the right, you see a spot of green. So perhaps that was a green tea, or perhaps it was a first flush Darjeeling. I'm not quite sure. But then just to the right of that, there is more of a silver tip of something. And another example, I'll go to this photo. Yeah. So if you to look at the center, I think there, and then just up a little bit, I think is like a Tiguanyen green ball rolled oolong leaf, I think. And then if you look all the way to the left and then up a little bit, there's another example of a leaf that is perhaps from the same tea. And even up above from that, there's more of a reddish leaf. And maybe that was a second flush Darjeeling. I drink a lot of those sometimes, so I don't exactly know, but I remember certain teas that I've had. A more distinct example in this photo, if you look towards the top right section, there's more of a chunk, more of a block. Yeah. And this was a pu'er tea that is stuffed into a pomelo that I bought from someone in California several years ago. And that particular tea was really pressed into the pomelo, and the idea of separate leaves was kind of lost, and so it became much more brick-like. And the result, when you break it apart and you brew it, there's not leaves that are unfurling, but rather this, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like it's more like blocks of wood or charcoal. Have you seen this in your tea experience?
I have seen that, yeah. And also sometimes it can, depending on the size of the leaf when they put it in there, and also the size of the fruit, like the ones that are in little mandrakes, it can almost sort of look like soil, you know, when it's softly starting to soak up the water and then loosen up a little bit. It just looks like really rich soil that you might find if you push aside some of the top leaf litter in a forest, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point. It was kind of soil-like.
In a good way.
In a good way, exactly. Yeah. So I just enjoy staring at these, to be honest. I think that from far away, it has the sort of elements of like a collage. And as you begin to look much more closely, you see just a lot of different color, and you see a lot of different browns, like I mentioned, or a lot of different greens or sort of gray blacks. And I just love to begin to see how this mixes together. And as you get closer and closer, you begin to discover different qualities that really stick out to you.
Do you find is it a different experience for you if the tea is in terms of like your own personal reaction and maybe some of the thoughts that come up, if the teas are mixed together versus when you have batches when they're separate?
I like the creation of the mixture. I think it's a connected in the world where the mix of people, the mix of environment, the mix of presence is important. I mean, all what we see in this photograph, it's all coming from the same type of plant, but slightly different variants and different production methods produce something that looks quite different upon a close look. But I remind myself that this is all basically the same thing.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. I have spent some time saving certain types of tea in separate areas and sections, and then making a bit of art from that. And so perhaps you can see in the preview here, this next photo, this is an example of taking 2 or maybe 3 distinct teas and applying a different point of view or a different creative process to formulate something very deliberate. And the top row is Golden Bud Yunnan Chinese black tea. This that I love to drink. That's some of my favorites. And the bottom portion is a mix of like a kuki-cha, so Japanese sencha in the stems, and maybe a bit of hojicha. I think that some of the stems there are quite brown, so I might have ended up mixing them. But I experimented a little bit through time with saving specific teas in different bags and just seeing what I could make. And I feel like I've seen other examples of art in the world that's a collage of some kind of multiple elements that are taken to create color, to create shape and create texture. And it was fun to do it with tea. I have another example here. So this is, I believe, 3 different teas. Probably again on the top left is Yunnan, on the right I will guess is Anji Baicha because I see very thin and green leaves. I could be wrong. The bottom portion, my guess is that is an Indian black tea. So second or first Darjeeling or Nepali black teas, but I don't exactly recall. But I think this is all essentially the same place, but coming from different regions in the world, different methods of production, and each one maintains its own look and feel and story. And yet it is the same kind of plant everywhere. So
actually, I think that's a really good point too, that even in this process of after the tea has been made by people and shipped to the other side of the world and consumed by people, and then through your process here of taking it to a different place, it still maintains its same story, like that story of its shape and its color and what it's just going to be remains with it the whole time. I think that there's something that's really beautiful about that.
I agree.
You should make prints of these, Michael. I'm telling you, make prints of them.
Thank you for the encouragement. I photograph quite a bit. I enjoy photographing tea, people drinking tea, the tea itself, the color, the texture, all this stuff. So I am continuing to do that. Here again is on the screen is another example of I took a handful of tea and just picked out individual leaves of types that I could very broadly identify. So some of these maybe look familiar. Some of these are kind of hard to tell. Like some of the leaves, you could get a room of experts, and they probably will have slightly differing opinions of what the teas might be. But it would make for a fun game, perhaps. And even, I do love these Chinese Yunnan black teas, but you can certainly have black teas that are prepared in a similar way from other parts of the world that have this product of a very pale golden bud, and that's great.
Yeah, the observing of that up close and the handling of it. It's always one of my favorite reactions to watch with people and with students. Like, even after just like a basic kind of like Tea 101 class, we take the leaves out of the pot and spread them out on the table and just look. And there's this moment sometimes where you can see, even if it can't quite be articulated into words for people, that they understand something much deeper than they did, even when they were tasting it, even when they were seeing loose leaf tea brew for the first time. It's it's being able to touch it and make that connection, like something really kind of comes alive for people. And I think part of that is, you know, tea is one of those few foodstuff products that we do have the opportunity to be very hands-on and tactile with. You know, some of the other things we get, and it's already it's made for us and it's completely done by the time it's presented. It's kind of akin, I think, to like even people who really love cooking at home. There's still something bigger about your world that opens up the first time that you go to a farmer's market or the first time you go to a U-pick farm and you see like, oh, that's what eggplant looks like when it's growing. Or, oh, this is how blackberries are harvested and these are a pain in the butt. You know, like this connection is made when you see it in a very different setting that helps remind you that this is a living thing. It's not an object that has no life to it. And I see that with people when they handle brewed tea leaves, like they get this is life that they are playing with right now, and it's really cool to see. Yeah.
It reminds me of what are the other ways we interact with a food or a drink product, like you mentioned. Like if you take a piece of fruit and you prepare fruit for yourself or vegetables, then you're interacting with it in some way. But you know, what is there? Like if I took a bunch of peels from an orange, if I sort of play with those and see what happens, and then you twist it and it kind of squirts stuff out, like it's still alive. This is the waste product that still has some kind of goodness or flavor or aroma that's still captured inside. But not so much maybe with a banana peel. Like I think that's easy to discard. I'm trying to think if there are other. There's I think a lot of ways to observe these products, I would say. So I like that quite a bit. I wonder what it would be like to talk to coffee people and ask, what is your experience with looking at coffee grounds that are brewed afterwards? Do you spend time studying them? Does it inform you about where it comes from, how it was produced, how it was roasted, all these things? I've never asked coffee people this before.
Do you have, I forgot to ask you, do you have any photos from the display on exhibit in this collection?
At the tea festival?
Yeah.
Yes, I do. And if you give me a moment, I will just prepare a few. We'll just leave that on the screen.
Oh, sure.
I need a minute to bring it up.
Because this is kind of like to travel with this sort of art project is very like, it's a bit intensive, right? Because it's what, 4 kilos of tea. So for those of us in the US, that's 9 pounds of tea just for this.
Yeah, I felt kind of funny, like transporting a very large double garbage bagged amount of tea product in a suitcase to protect it. I will prepare just a few photos. The experience at the tea festival was very nice. It was the first time I had just taken the leaves themselves and shown them to an audience since the exhibition that I had made in 2015. And it was quite nice to bring it to a place where I knew that there would be a lot of people, first who have a general interest in tea, and also a variety of their own experience in tea. But it was nice to kind of be in the room with people who had at least an automatic interest in the world of tea. And it was great to see
discussion there.
Sorry?
There's like an in for the discussion there because they're already into tea.
So let me open these ones. No, so I will change the sharing. So some of these photographs were taken by me and others were taken by a friend another volunteer who was assisting me in the setup and the process. So this is a scene from the Berlin Tea Festival just a few weekends ago. It takes place in a church, and there was a particular area called the interactive area. And there was a table and a variety of different people it was all in the program. A variety of people spent time brewing tea or doing other tea related activities. So here I am on the left, and speaking to a woman. She was playing with the tea, and so all the tea is there on a table. And later on, I showed some photographs to a friend of mine, and she said, "Oh, it looks like an alien, like an alien blob on on." Yeah, and in the process, I tried to invite people to come and touch the tea, and people were a little timid at first. They were not quite sure what was happening. They didn't know if they were allowed to touch it, and I was constantly just kind of fumbling with the tea myself and inviting people to come and touch it. And they were a little bit timid, but some of them really got into it, and they were, not to say throwing it around, but they were grabbing handfuls of it and then throwing it down again. And people were smelling it. They were understanding that there was quite a lot of texture. If you take an amount of tea like this and apply pressure to it, it remains very rigid. It's very it remains very rigid and doesn't move very much. But then if you begin to apply more pressure, everything begins to crack and crinkle. And then you begin to break all the leaves and it becomes kind of more dusty. But it's also very, very strong, I would say. And it was nice to show people that there are ways to interact with this. And it's okay to interact with this. Please come and touch this record of tea drinking. People were very interested in it. They were smiling, they were curious. They asked what kind of tea, and I said, oh, it's almost every type of tea that is around. It's everything that I had consumed. And they had not seen, I think for everyone, this was it was a very new way to look at tea, because so much of I think the look of tea is put into when you buy it, you see it fresh in a bag or in a bowl or something, or in a tea vessel like a gaiwan or a pot, and then you drink it and then you're done. But now my whole wish amongst all of this tea art is to bring attention to what remains in this as a record, as a waste product, as sort of an archive of what's been consumed. And so this was a very nice experience to let people come in and see it. And at the festival, also the paper prints that I had were on display, and I talked a little bit about the process to spread leaves down and apply pressure to let them leak a little bit. And a great number of people had a lot of fun with the tea leaves. So I was very, very pleased. At the end, there's a lot of granularity, so big leaves and then a lot of dust particles. So the process to put it back into this bag doesn't take too long, but then you have all this dust that's left over. This is real tea dust, and so it takes a little bit of extra care to make sure that it doesn't get everywhere. And I don't want to save all the tea dust, because then it adds a little bit too much. So this is actually something that I will discard. And it's all on just a very simple canvas tablecloth piece of fabric that I purchased. So the tea was on display for about 30 minutes, and people got to interact with it themselves. It was really nice.
Do you think, did anybody talk to you about, do you think you changed any or opened up some points of view for people about how their own relationship with tea, at what point is it considered a waste at the end? What point is it considered done? Do you think maybe some people might have left feeling a little bit different about how they treat their tea leaves?
I'm not sure. I certainly hope so. I think that I'm trying to recall the examples where the used product, the waste product of some kind of activity that one would do would be set aside and saved and then observed afterwards. And I think that people were very delightfully surprised to see this, and hopefully it left a bit of an impression to see something that was a different point of view on something that we were all there to enjoy.
Yeah, and I mean, and some of the it always depends on the environment that I'm teaching in, and sometimes I kind of I kind of regret, in some conditions where there's just there's no nature nearby, like a convention center or something like that, or whatnot. You have to work a little harder to find the nature. But when possible, I really enjoy at the end of class, allowing students to take the tea leaves outside and spread it on the ground.
Oh, how nice.
So there's not like this cut and dry, we've had this wonderful experience with tea and now let's just like trash it. Like thinking of someone, and not to say that somebody would have to do that every single time they have tea, although there's certainly, I think that's wonderful if you could, but to just have that, the awareness of continuation of an experience and continuation of this inner being with something, like it, whether or not you choose to honor that process and do something yourself, it's continuing, even if you're not aware of it. So you may as well, if you're able to, create some sort of awareness of putting it back,
Yeah, I think it touches on this generally in my life these days. I prefer to buy basically as little as possible, and except for things that I need to remain alive and to have basic comfort. Something that I do love to buy though is tea. When I travel, if I meet certain people, and it's always nice to continue drinking teas that I love and having new teas and drinking teas with people, of course. And I never feel bad about the waste product that is consumed, because I know that the waste product that's produced from drinking tea, whether it's from we drink tea and then we go to the bathroom, or we drink tea and then we have these leaves that are left over, all of this can be reabsorbed into the planet again. Food products as well, your banana peel, your citrus peel, that too. And I think it's nice to sort of place a certain value on this kind of waste product. Like I don't think of it fully as waste, rather as a bit of a reminder of what I have consumed. And it just, I find it satisfying that I know that it can go back someday.
I think that's a really great way of looking at it too. Like not so much waste per se, is just, as you say, like a marker for your experience. It's almost like writing in a journal,
Yeah. I don't collect very much in my life, except in my experiences, tea leaves, and I take a lot of digital photographs, but that takes up relatively little space, which I appreciate. So, yeah.
So as this is a project that you've spent years curating and thinking through, and have you noticed, are there other areas that you think that people could become aware of? You could call it waste, or you could call it maybe points where more attention could be paid to the overall of the tea experience. Are there other things that you think that people could do that help them be more intentionally connected with their tea?
I don't know. I think that there's, if we talk about the meditative aspect of tea, where every single step that one takes to prepare tea can be appreciated in one's own way, whether it's the time or the pace or the environment that you're in, or if you're drinking it alone or drinking it with friends. It all can make for different experiences for everyone. And I think every action that we take in our life, every movement that we make, every sound that we make, all this stuff has an impact on someone or something elsewhere. So perhaps I'm hyper aware in some ways of certain things, what one does and how it impacts me or other people around us. Perhaps I'm too aware or too careful about it sometimes, so I try to chill out and relax about it as well. But I think that there are many ways to be observant of your own actions and other people's and see what kind of impact it has. And there are also many ways to practice what you would like to be able to maintain the space as you want. And I think tea is a nice way to do that, whether it's by yourself or with people or at the workplace or while you're on the go or something. So feel free to, it's always nice. I encourage people just to feel free to enjoy what they happen to enjoy, no matter what it is or how strange you might think it is, or nuanced or trivial or anything. It's enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought the idea of tea is a meditation practice. One of the things that I have discussions with people about is the time aspect of it, not just like the duration of time that you will sit down and have your tea, but the way that time is utilized and made intentional throughout the entirety of that practice. Like that too can become something where there's a waste product in that. If you're not applying that point of view. So for example, things like when you're settling in to start brewing the tea, there's the time that it takes to do different motions to reach for the kettle and to prepare the tea, the time that you're waiting for it to prepare and to steep, the time that it takes to serve to other people. It's not, and I think especially for people who are new to some sort of practice like that, meditation is not just the stop start of when butt hits cushion and you assume the position of I'm now, and that's it, and then you hit stop on the clock when it's done. It's the entirety of that experience, and when you can move through that, you learn one, you have more time than you think you do, but also that you're wasting less because you were so much more aware of the entirety of the experience, and I think you get more out of it that way. And I think that this is a way of really, in terms of tea, in terms of really appreciating like everything it can give, when you bring that awareness to all of that and you're not wasting any part of that experience. Even like the most humble tea that comes from a tea bag can be something that is a really meaningful experience.
Yeah, I think tea is, I think almost every culture, every community in the world has some kind of tea or some kind of hot beverage that is important for health and for hospitality and for eating. And it's whether it's tea like this or herbal teas or something fresh, or I mean, even making soup. Like everywhere in the world, they make some kind of hot soup, vegetables mixed together with stuff to make like something. And that, I think that's the humanity has been making stuff like this, has been taking plants and cooking them or soaking them in hot water and consuming the liquid forever. And I think we can by all means continue doing it because it's quite core to humanity, and understand the benefit not only to the physical health but also the mental health of the routine that we undertake to cook water and to make tea and share it with people.
I like how you talk too about the community that you find yourself in now that you've been living in Berlin for some years, that what is considered art has such an expansive point of view. I wonder, like in either your community that you live in when you're sharing tea, or when you travel, like come back to the States to visit family and such, do you find that there's opportunities to share this kind of point of view with people and talk about it, and it's something that is easily understood, and it's not like I was like sharing with you earlier, sometimes I'm very aware that depending on where I'm at, like some of my ideas about tea can be very woo, and I try to like filter that, so it's it's meeting somebody where they're at. But do you have opportunity where you meet people who kind of have a commonality around how they think of tea in this way?
A little bit. I think it certainly varies where I am. And how it is. If you're coming over to my house to hang out and to drink tea, that's one thing. If we are going to a cafe to have tea or a coffee or a pastry or something, that's another example. If I'm traveling and bringing my own tea things, which I often do to people's houses, it's I never want it to be insulting, like, oh, your tea is bad, I'm bringing better tea. So I try to be careful with that, because I know my own journey of becoming much more aware and accepting of wherever you are, to appreciate and enjoy. And nobody has bad tea; they just have different tea. But it's nice sometimes when I travel home, people are like, "Oh, I only have tea bags," and I'm like, "Oh, it's fine. Let's just have tea and talk. It's okay." But also, it's kind of nice. It is at the same time nice to bring the pieces to make a certain quality or a certain type of tea and be able to share it with people, because for them, it's a new experience to have tea when someone brings it.
Yeah.
I bring this tea for this reason, and I would like to share it with you because I think you'll like it, or because it's morning time and it's nice to have a strong black tea, or it's evening time and we want to relax and have something herbal and very flavorful and very Christmassy, for example. So in that case, I'm happy to bring the tea always to wherever I go.
I think that's very sweet too, of like having the awareness of being able to, like you're not correcting anybody by bringing a better tea, but you're sharing, actually, like, and people that tea is something that that is shared. It's not like the phrase I use a lot sometimes in workshops is, let's try to think about this less transactionally. Like, it's not something we're just buying and taking product away, but it's something that we share. I think that that's really wonderful.
Yeah, and I mean, people bring cookies, baked goods, frittatas, salads, all these things because they happen to enjoy making a particular thing, and they want to spend time to make their version of it and bring it and share it with you. And so then there's multiple inputs of that sort of thing, and it makes for a collective nice experience. And tea is for sure part of that.
One thing that I wanted to mention to folks, is your wonderful photography and what you post on your blog and everything. So one of the things I love most about your photography is just like the observational quality of everyday life, like little moments that happen when you travel. Whether they involve people, like it's usually under the header of like recently in, which I love. But it could be things like outlet covers or street covers or signs, stuff that is intentionally for people to see, but you're pointing out like a different point of view of it. I'm curious, like, is that something that was always there for you? Did you always look at the environment and the world around you in that kind of way? Or is that something that, in a way, tea informed the ability to do that, and it's kind of grown since you've really gotten into tea?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think there was a general interest there, and I think that tea and travel built upon each other to raise my awareness of a variety of little things and to appreciate the things that I look at naturally and enjoy their silliness or the look about them. And so I always like to tell people, like, no matter what you like, it's okay. Just enjoy it, and by all means take photographs of the things that you want to photograph because you happen to enjoy the look or the color or where you happen to be. But I think that let's say in the last 5 years, as I've been living in Berlin, as I have been able to travel within Europe and beyond because of this location, I also am able to see a lot more stuff like this. So you're right, signage. A good example is like a construction sign. If you imagine the construction, like that triangle sign with the figure and the shovel, to indicate to drivers or pedestrians that there's construction happening in this area. I've found, let's say, 10 examples where the sign is all a little bit different, where the figure has a slightly different shape to the body. The figure is wearing shoes. The figure has a pile in front of them and behind. The pile is more or less detailed, or more or less minimalist, like triangle, all these things. So it's just a construction sign, but the design of the sign is informed by the local history in design and the culture itself. All culture is putting different priority on color, on shapes, on presentation of humanity. All of that drives the way that these general signs are created. Just look at arrows. When you travel, if you go to different states, different cities, different states, the type of arrow that's used, the drawing of the arrow, the size, the thickness is different everywhere. Even if you're in an airport or if you're driving your car, you see arrows everywhere, but they're all different, and they all are designed in terms of style to support a certain purpose and a certain visual so that you can interpret them, whether you're very close to them or very far away from them. And just take that even further outside of states and within different countries. Arrows are all different everywhere, and it's nice to see them.
Yeah, well, and I like your point too, that it's a reflection of the local culture and communicating within that culture. And I definitely see ties to that with tea too, where if anything, I think that drinking a variety of tea and trying to view it through something that we're more connected to is a way of building our inner flexibility, our tolerance, our acceptance, and hopefully embracing those differences. You know, initially when people in a class encounter a tea that's new to them, sometimes this reaction of like, oh, I don't like that one. You know, and we can kind of like dig in a little deeper and figure out like why, like what is it that it reminds you of, what is it that's the pushback for you. And through time of really considering that, I think we start to soften those barriers. We realize that this particular tea is a reflection of the culture where it came from. And as you start to get more exposure to that, you start to understand that everything should be different. It's not supposed to all be the same. And, you know, arrows aren't the same everywhere. They're a reflection of like how the people in that area communicate. And also, like you say, like the history of design in that area. I think that's a huge part of that. It's really wonderful, where you kind of feel like you're really fortunate then to witness that, to be able to see like these differences in art and in design preference wherever you go. That's really cool.
Yeah, there's a lot to see out there in the world, whether it's with tea or arrows or construction signs or baked goods. It's nice to experience it for yourself as well. So I also encourage everyone to travel as much as they can.
Yes. So I guess just like wrapping up here, like what happens next with your project? What do you what ideas do you have going forward for this?
Yeah, I will continue to save the leaves. It's just a natural thing that I like to do. And I believe there is a tea event taking place in Berlin in March. And it will be sort of a tea gathering, tasting and ambient music and a gathering. Not like a party with techno music, but rather sitting and talking or not talking and tea brewing by a few people. And I was invited to show the tea leaves again. So I'll bring the collection of tea leaves, and I'll probably make tea as well and share that with people. And it's I look forward to having another opportunity to show the leaves to people and see what their reaction is and let people play with them. But I'll continue collecting. I'll continue photography, and I don't know. 20 years go by and then I have 50 kilos of tea or something like this. So I don't really know what will happen. So
you make compost.
Compost. When I die, we can compost me and the tea leaves.
Oh, well, you can make smaller batches of compost between now and then donate them to local farms and stuff.
That's a little bit less morbid. You're right.
Yeah, come on. Jeez.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your art with everyone. I think that's so awesome and so beautiful. So folks can find your website, michaelpieracci.com. They can also find you on Instagram at the same. Anywhere else people might be able to find you if they want to like see more of your photography or learn more?
Yeah, a fine place to begin is at my website, michaelpieracci.com, because I have links there for a variety of places. Flickr and Instagram and YouTube and some other stuff and some other texts and insight that I have online. So yes, thank you very much. This has been a lot of fun to talk about this and to dig into our own worlds and love for tea and how they're influenced by other tea people and all that. So it's been quite nice. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a wonderful holiday season.
Yes, likewise.
Take care. So again, thanks everyone for watching and for being here this year and sharing part of this community with me. So again, if you're interested to support this work and to learn more or take classes yourself too, my website, patreon.com/beingtea, is where you can find different levels to be able to participate in classes. Absolutely, every member is really vital and really important to this community. This kind of work of being able to share works of other tea people and host events and teach at different festivals. This is all thanks to the support of viewers like you. So please be in touch. If you have an idea for either like an event that you would like to see some of my workshops at, or maybe somebody that you think should be interviewed on our program, feel free to reach out anytime on my website at beingtea.com. Until then, have a wonderful rest of your holiday season, and I will see you early next year with more interviews. Take care.